In the opening session, Dr. Henry Cloud presents an overview of happiness, beginning with the current research on where happiness comes from. He shares an exciting finding. Scientific studies are proving ancient spiritual principles to be true. Happiness does not come from the sources that most people seek, but from specific practices in our lives. We can control far more than we realize in achieving happiness. This series will cover all 13 laws, also referred to as life practices, to happiness. In the second part of this first presentation, Dr. Cloud teaches us that happy people are not lazy about happiness.
Hi guys, welcome to Solutions. I'm Dr. Henry Cloud, and in this edition, we are going to talk about this question: what makes you happy? Do you know? I mean, we all have ideas and we have had experiences and we kind of have a general feel of this, but we're actually going to talk about the science of this, because in the last probably decade or so, the field of psychology actually has gone and done an enormous amount of empirical research on the science of happiness. And you know what? There's some very robust findings. Science has been proving what makes people happy and what fails to make them happy. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at all of that research and we're going to put it all together and come up with some, kind of piles of things that you can go use in a practical way. But let me give you a little bit of background on why we're doing this. When I wrote the book, The Secret Things of God, is about the spiritual secrets that kind of affect a lot of areas of life. The publisher came and asked me, it's been 2 years later, what would you like to write about next in this spiritual secret series? And I said, I want to write about happiness. And they said, well, this is kind of a faith-based book. What about happiness? And I said, well, and I told them I'd been studying all of this research for about 2 years. And as I read that research, it was amazing to me that the reality of that research, when you get into it, it was exactly what the Bible was telling us about practices that affect us and make us happy and where we find happiness and all of that. And so what I wanted to do, and what this there'll be 6 editions of this, 6 programs like this. I wanted to write and show how science is actually proving what the Bible says about what makes people happy. So that's a little bit of the background on this. So what we're going to do is tonight or today, whenever you watch this, we used to do solutions at night, and I would always open up, welcome tonight. For all I know, you're one of those early birds that's watching this at 6 in the morning. But whenever you're watching it, what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk about the overall findings of the research and ask you some questions to think about in terms of your own life. And then I'm going to talk about the first principle of happiness. And then in upcoming, there's going to be 5 more. I'm going to break down the piles of a lot of the robust findings about that. Okay, so that's a little bit about where we're headed. Now, let me tell you a story which sort of illustrates this. I was doing the radio show one day, and I walked in, and one of the co-hosts, I won't tell you which one, when I sat my computer down, he said, oh, I got one of those. Those things, they tell me are incredible. I can't wait to use it. I said, well, why haven't you used it yet? He said, I couldn't get it to work. I said, what? He said, it's brand new. The thing won't turn on. I said, well, that's unusual for them to ship one that won't work. I said, what did you do? And he said, well, I pushed those buttons down there. And he starts pushing the mouse clicker buttons. And I'm going, well, did you hit the button up there? And he goes, what button is that? And so I hit the power button. 30 seconds later, it boots up and all these chimes and blue lights and stuff. He goes, what did you do? I said, I turned it on. It really works a lot better if you do that. Obviously, he's like very embarrassed. But what does that have to do with happiness? A lot. Here's the deal. As we're going to see in this series, and as science has been proving, you are, and I want you to get this, you are wired. And I mean physical hardwiring in your brain with biochemistry and, a lot of stuff, complicated stuff, designed that when you do certain things, you get turned on. You get happy. You have well-being. The Bible's word for this is shalom. It means an overall sense of well-being, prospering. Doesn't mean you go get rich at every turn. What that word means when it says so that you will prosper, it means that you'll thrive and you'll do well. And part of that is being happiness. Doesn't mean we don't go through downtimes and loss and pain and misery and all that, but it means overall that you're a thriver. Okay, but how do we do that? Well, that's what we're going to see. There are practices that actually make that happen. But before we get into that, I want to give you a map of the math of happiness. The book is called The Law of Happiness. And what that's about, when I said the law, is that God has given us a design for life, sort of like the laws of physics. And there's a math to this of how everything works. All right? Now, guess what? The first thing that can make you happy are your circumstances. Okay? For instance, you've had your eyes set on that new car, that new job, that promotion, that person you want to date, or you want to get married, or you want to move in that house, or you want to move to a new town, and you think, gosh, I'm looking forward to this, and I'm going to do it, and your circumstances change, or you get a new job, and you get away from that psycho boss, or whatever it is, and you're going to feel happier. You know, when your circumstances are good, you're going to feel happier, and just way happy, right? Well, not so much. This is what's surprising. You know how much your circumstances affect your happiness? Give me a number. What percentage? If you're rich or poor, healthy or not healthy, have the house you want versus have the house you don't want, have the job you want versus not, have a crummy boss, good boss, anything around you. Guess how much that's going to affect your happiness. You ready for this? This is scientific data. 10%. 10%? You're kidding me. You mean if I lose 100 pounds, I'm only going to be 10% happier? That's a lot of jogging for mere 10%. Exactly. Okay, now that's not to say we don't want nice things and we don't want a nice life, but here's the deal. Whether you're single or married or rich or poor or all of that, you only get about a 10% bump in your happiness. It's not a lot. It's a little. It's worth it. But here's what we find out about the 10%. It's only a bump, and then you go back to, as we're going to talk about in a moment, a set point, which is kind of like your happiness level. Now, where does that come from? Well, the next thing we know is that we're going to call it genetic. That's kind of what the research calls it. It's kind of constitutional, whether it's actually in your genes or your wiring or, you know, kind of early development, who knows? But there's sort of this constitutional wiring that you have in your temperament and your genes and all of that gives us about 50%. Okay? So you got a temperament, you got a wiring, kind of like whether you win the lottery or lose in Vegas or, you know, whatever's going on with you, that's another 10%. Okay? And guess what? This you have no control over. Our circumstances, by and large, you know, it's a roll of the dice. We don't have a lot of control over. But are you ready for the good news? Here's the good news. There is another 40% that comes from things that you have direct control over. And that's what this next 6 episodes is going to be about. There are life practices that you have 100% control over, that will, whatever your set point is in here, and whatever's going on in your life, you can thrive based on if you are one of the people that does the things and the things that we're going to be talking about. And research has proven that if you aren't doing these things and you begin to do these things, your happiness and well-being is going to go up. A lot of other aspects of that. Things like your immune system will change. You will be healthier. You will live longer, unless bad things happen, obviously. You'll probably make more money. Your relationships will be better. You will, and it's just a bunch of stuff that is related to what's going on in your life. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through those. That's the math of happiness. So start to think about, are you putting all of your cookies over here? Thinking that If only I got to have that house, if only I have that car, if only I have that person, or if only I could get rid of the person I got, or whatever it is that's an if only. It's not where you spend your primary time and energy. But here's what's interesting. We have a culture that says exactly that. That happiness lies in losing 40 pounds, or looking a different way, or owning the latest gadget, or. And that is a big fat lie. Not only will the spiritual values in life tell you that, but also science will back it up as well. So, having said that, we're going to be looking at this area of life and all of the things that kind of go into that and what we can be doing. Now, let me tell you one more thing about this 10%. All right? Whatever that is that you're pursuing, you think it's going to make you happy. Guess what? Not only do you only get a 10% bump on your circumstances, but this has what's called a short, O-R-T, shelf life. In other words, as I said a little while ago, you get a bump, but you go back to this set point of kind of who you are. We have some practical examples of this. You ever got in a new car and you get in, it smells so good, and you got all these gadgets, and you're so fired up, and you're looking at your watch waiting for work to end so you can go drive your new car, or you get a new fishing rod, or whatever it is. You get a new relationship, and there's this bump, and there's a known reality that's in the common language. What is it? Well, the new car smell goes away. Or the new car smell of your new relationship goes away. What do they call that? The honeymoon period is over. And in the initial stages, there's all sorts of chemicals that get that you get released, and people do, crazy things when they fall in love. But it goes back down to a set point that has to do with who you are. So I say all that to kind of set this up in an age-old way that if you go to the Bible, you go back to the very beginning, there is a story, your ancestors, Adam and Eve. And the story is this, that God has given them all these trees in the garden, they have great fruit on them. And he says, eat of all these trees and let the fruit of these trees fulfill you. And on those trees, there were all these great fruits like golf, and more golf, and the great golf courses of the world. And you kind of see what makes me happy. And whatever that means to you, the fruits of everything God had created. And then he said, avoid one tree, the knowledge of good and evil. Now that symbolizes a lot of things. But one of the things we know that it symbolizes is that there was the desire, if you ate of that tree, it was to be like God and know everything, to know what's good and to know what's not good, and to kind of be the designer and the judge. See, we were created to let God design life and then for us to live it and experience. And he told us, eat of these trees. But here's what we did. We took the seduction, and the seduction was, I can be like God, knowing the difference between good and bad. Thinking I would know what's good for me better than God does. And so the serpent came along and said, you can know better than what God says what's good for you. And so we did that seduction. Every single day, our culture comes along as the serpent and tries to lure us away from what the age-old spiritual wisdom has told us will make us happy, which we're going to see. And what we do is we think, if only. I remember I was talking to a woman one time who was single. And for her, the big prize was to finally get married. And she thought that if she were finally married, then she would be happy. And I said, well, that's really not true. She says, what do you mean it's not true? I said, well, it sounds like you think that marriage is what makes people happy. She said, well, yeah. That's what I'm I'm longing for and waiting on. And I said, well, do you know that research shows there's not that much difference in happiness between married and single people? She goes, well, I just can't imagine. She said, I would be devastated if I didn't get married. I said, devastated? Devastated is a word I use for trauma victims. People go through horrible things in life. I said, you go study all of humanity, you're going to find a lot of thriving, happy single people who aren't devastated. So somehow this one trophy has become your if only. She's putting her whole life at stake here. I would ask you, what's your if only? Is it that promotion? Is it getting in that circle of friends? Is it whatever it is? That's not going to do it. Okay? So having said that, that's sort of the math of all this happiness and the way it works out. And as we're going here, kind of begin to think about, where have you bought into the seduction? If you're a human, you have the human nature of buying into the if only. Like this stuff is going to make it all work. You know what's interesting is if you go to the grocery store and you're in the checkout line and you look at all the tabloids there, you see these devastated lives, like drug overdose and suicide and this, that, and the other, of all the people, not all the people, of the people who have all of the things that the culture tells us will make you happy. They've got the beautiful other movie star mate, or they've had 8 of them, or they've got the mansions, or they get $20 million, per movie. And they've got the adoration and the fame, and everybody wants their autograph and thinks they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. And they have all of the stuff. And sometimes the people with all of the stuff are the most miserable ones and are addicted to drugs and can't find their way and all of that stuff. So if the 10% were really going to fulfill us, they'd be the happiest people. The rest of us would be sort of like, oh, well, guess we missed it. But here's the other side of it. They do the research and they find some people don't have much of any of that stuff, that they're thriving. What is it that they do? They do this stuff. Okay? So that's a little bit about where the background of this is. Now, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go through and take all of this research, and it clusters in a bunch of piles, and I'm going to go through those.